In this recording, we want to look at two short examples of how not to double quote. So here's an example from one of the Beowulf essays that does this double quoting thing. Grendel's lack of human characteristics is evident in his attack on Herod, when the author describes him as that dark death shadow who lurked and swooped. So what's good about this sentence is we have a pretty good structure. We have this theme up here, lack of human characteristics. That's pretty good. We have a quotation that supports that, generally speaking, and it is cited properly with the period over here and the line numbers correctly indicated in the parentheses. The problem that we have is with how long this quotation is. It doesn't look that long, only a few words, but it has three different elements that can be analyzed in a larger scope of a paragraph. First, we have this bit about being the death shadow, so what Grendel is, and then things that he does, this verb and this verb. So we have existential quality here, and then an action verb here, and a separate action verb here. Just because they're linked with an and doesn't mean that they're the same thing. So you have three possibilities here, and quoting the whole line at once is a problem, because what you're going to have to do then is go back, as the writer does here, to the first part that we want to look at. That dark death shadow is clearly a very inhuman description. So what are we going to do here that we want to avoid? First of all, the quotation cannot be the subject of a verb. So make a note of that, because it's not too bad. I don't see that happening too often. But the CD cannot be a subject of a verb. Make that one of your goals. The second problem with this sentence is that we have a pretty weak verb. So we have the weak verb is. You want to replace that with something, with some sort of action verb or a definitive verb, something that isn't just the state of being. Then we have this clearly and all of the things that are like that, clearly, obviously. Don't be using these things. Take these out. Eliminate these from your writing. First of all, it's probably not clearly or obviously anything. If it is, then you shouldn't be writing it in your paragraph because there's no analysis that can be made. So just get rid of that. And then here's the claim that the writer wants me to see. It's a very inhuman description, but the next word in the next sentence is furthermore, which makes a list. And the reader says, whoa, wait a minute. Before we move on to the next thing, where's your explanation of this thing that you want me to know? What is it about 1, 2, 3, 4 words that you quoted that suggest this? We don't need the word that. Right? So remember to edit your quotations. Just because the word that is originally there and seems like, well, if I take the that out, I don't have as clear a description of what this thing is. I know, but that does not help you at all to talk about this inhuman description, so it can't be quoted. Don't follow your quotation with a word that starts with a listing word like furthermore. What this writer then has to go back and do is go back and look at the two verbs, lurked and swooped, that have already been quoted up here, using the same weak verb, using that same clearly thing, which we want to get rid of, but smushing them together as if they are the same thing, but they aren't. Lurked is one verb and swooped is another. So along with editing the quotations, pay attention to different words. Even if they're linked by a listing word in the original text, doesn't mean that you can deal with them as one thing. These are clearly two separate words to use clearly, properly. All right, let's take a look at one way that we could revise that original sentence without the double quoting. So even though here I had a theme to look at, it's pretty broad. This is most likely the whole topic of the entire essay. So if you can narrow that down in the sentence before you get to your CD, the better. So the narrative begins his characterization of Grendel as an inhuman with a fundamental absence of human reality. So here's something that's more specific than just he lacks human characteristics. That would be my entire topic for my whole paper, and then my reader might say, how does he lack those characteristics? And here's one of the ways he does it. He has this absence of reality. Now I've taken out the that, I've taken out the dark. I like dark, but when I first did this, I had dark in there and realized that that was actually a quality that wasn't helping me here. It wasn't helping me focus on this particular weird phrase, death shadow. That's what I really want to look at. So don't overdo the quotation just because there's a nice word in there that sounds good. But if you can't cover it, don't put it in the quotation. So as a death shadow, that's all I want to look at. And then in the same sentence with my CD, I have to have something that repeats my key term from my topic sentence. Grendel lacks any physical substance recognizable as human. That is another way of saying this, but it's connected to my topic sentence, my CD. And the reader might say to me, as they should, how does that work? How do these two words do what you say they do, lack any physical substance? So I could put a period here, but how about putting a semicolon? A semicolon is the same thing as a period. It separates two full sentences, but it's not as full a stop as a period. The semicolon indicates to the reader, I'm not really done with the argument I'm making in this part of the sentence. Stay with me, reader. I'm not completely finished yet. That's what the semicolon is going to do. And that's in fact what's going on here. I'm clarifying what I mean by lacks any physical substance recognizable as human. How does this word here, this little phrase, do this thing? Here's my explanation. A human may cast a shadow, but a human cannot be that shadow. And you might say, isn't this the same word as here? Aren't you double quoting? It is the same word, but I don't need to quote it again. I can just use this word. This is an ordinary word, same as I'm going to do down here with death. Death and shadow are just ordinary nouns. They're not anything particular that I have to re-quote it here. I've quoted it once here. I can use that same word again in my own sentence without feeling like I have to quote it. And then here, in fact, that's a transition that indicates I'm making it even a little more specific. I'm going from this claim about the word shadow to something that's going to incorporate this bit about the death part. In fact, Grendel is a shadow, so I'm repeating my word, of something that isn't even a character, but rather the indefinable force of death. Here's my word again from my quotation. I don't need to quote it again. I, as a writer, can just use the word death without feeling like I have to quote it. It's an ordinary enough noun. What I want you to see here is that if you cut down on the number of words you quote, just because that was in there doesn't mean we should put quoting the that. Dark was in there, and it's a good word for my general idea here, but it was causing me too much trouble. I was having to do too many things at once. If I want to do that dark thing, I can work on that later. Narrow your focus to something like this, which is more than rich enough. It's got two qualities in here that you can explain in the sentences that follow. And now I want to go on to those verb things, lurked and swooped, but I can't just start writing about, as we did over here, just make a list. Furthermore is a good word if you're really making a list, but I'm not really making a list. This is one kind of not human, and these are potentially other kinds of not human. So I shouldn't really be using the word furthermore. So I'm going to make a connection back to all this stuff about his being physically not human. Grendel may be physically not human, but the poet's early description of his actions, that's going to introduce my focus on the two verbs, not just and now here's another thing, but I'm setting my reader up for the particular kind of quotations they're going to see. So, and here's then my claim about that. The description of the actions suggests something more complex, not just simply, okay, he's not human. That's all or nothing. But the verb suggests maybe there's a combo in there. How did I get to that? This original writer just put them together as they're just clearly not human. You could argue that, I suppose, if there's some more argument that could follow. But when I look at these words, I see swooped as an animal verb. That I hear swooped, I think bird. But lurk is not that same kind. An animal really can't lurk. Lurk is a word that implies criminal intent. It implies that you are thinking out an intention to hurt somebody, to steal something, to do some sort of crime. That's why we have this word, is to suggest that intent. So animals cannot have that intent. That is a specifically human word. So when I go to do my analysis of these words, I can't put them together. I've got to separate them, even though they're listed in the original text. And I want to keep my contrast. While is a word that shows contrast. While Grendel's status as one who swooped connects him with birds. So here's my analysis of this word. I don't need to quote it twice. I don't need to quote this whole line with both verbs together and then go back and say, okay, now let's look at swooped. Just quote the word as you need it, as it comes up in your prose. So while swooped does this, his second action, and that helps my reader keep them as separate things, of Lurking, because the original word was lurked, but that doesn't work in my sentence, I have to take out the ed, I have to put in my square brackets and put in the form that I want. His second action of lurking, and then here's my analysis of lurking. Implies a mental capacity to form criminal intent, blah, blah, blah. So what we're practicing here is not quoting the whole line. Grendel swooped and lurked, lurked and swooped, and then go back and do it again. Instead, set it up first. Here's what I want my reader to see. You know what? He's actually kind of complex. He's got an animal verb and he's got a human verb. I'm going to tell them that in the sentences as I quote my word. My reader's going to say, what do you mean complex? Here's the first word, that's animal. Here's the second word, that's human. The sentences that follow are going to follow up on that. They're going to restate this bit about complex and tell my reader how these two words make complexity. So if you just look at how much longer it is, this one is it's not, I don't want to say mostly the quotation, but the quotation itself takes up a lot of the 4.5 lines. It's here and it's here again and it's here again. This one is considerably longer, and look at how much the quotation appears. Just here, and then this other word, and this other word. Not here it all is at the beginning, and now let me go back and do it again. Let's look at a slightly more complicated one here. The narrator opens his description of Beowulf with the trait mightiest man alive. The word mighty suggests the physical strength. The word alive suggests this, and alive is that. It's too bullet pointy here. Here's the full quotation, and then let me go back and do mighty, which isn't really even the same word. Be careful about doing that. The word is mightiest. You can't then quote it again but change the form. And then here's another word, and then here's something else about that word. They read like bullet points. Got to be on the lookout for non-bullet pointy things in your paragraph. So instead, here I'm going to put my quotation at the beginning, and now I've got a word I want my reader to see. I got this word from doing my close reading. Mighty is something that's physical, seems like he's really something, but alive is a kind of limiting word. So I looked at that and thought, well, that's really weird, that's combining those two things. How about if I come up with a key term that's going to tell my reader what to look for? Heroic duality. First, Beowulf does have a level of physical strength exceeding that of all others. That's my commentary on mightiest. And I want to make sure my reader understands that that's what I'm talking about. So I'm going to put this extra phrase in there. As reflected in the poet's use of the superlative, that is the EST form, right? That's the superlative. Of the superlative form mightiest. Whoa, 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 you might say, there you are quoting it again. You're telling us not to quote it again, and you've done that. Right, I have, because I want to make sure my reader knows which part of this thing I'm looking at. And in both sentences where I'm quoting that word, I have some analysis. Here's my first key term, duality, and then here's my other bit of analysis. Mightiest is the superlative form. I'm really giving them a restatement of what I mean by superlative. However, so I have a nice linking word here that shows contrast. My semicolon is telling my reader I'm not quite done yet. Duality is my key term. That's what I want them to see. Mightiest is one half of it, and this alive business, this limitation of the alive, is the other half. Use your contrast words to show that. The poet doesn't end with that superlative, so I have a repeat of my word to keep my sentences together. And then this part is about this bit about what alive is. Here I haven't quoted alive again because it's pretty clear from here what it is. Only as long as Beowulf lives. That's another way of saying alive. I don't need to quote it again. Here I did because I wanted to make sure that superlative was clear. If my reader doesn't know what that means, my analysis is not going to work for that reader. So to sum up, be attentive to how much of the text you're quoting at once. If one line of the text raises two or more themes that you've noticed in your close reading, then you cannot quote it all at once. Break it down one thing at a time. Find ways to link two separate themes. And if you can't find a way to link them, then you shouldn't have them in the same essay. If you do find that you have to quote a word twice, like I did with mightiest over here, I felt that I had to quote it again because I had to make sure that my reader knew what superlative means. If my reader didn't know, my analysis isn't going to be clear. So if you do find that you have to quote it twice, be sure that both of your sentences that use the quoted word also include analysis or clarification of the significance. If you're just quoting it again to give me the word, that's the sign to you that you've quoted it too many times. Go back to the first time you quoted it and take it out.